Good morning. I see you are all back to this magnificent room after a hard day of work yesterday and in good spirits for another good day of work, discussions, and in particularly agreements. I am really honored to be moderating this third roundtable that is going to be addressing a key issue that is part of our conference, Children and Youth, Tomorrow's Global Citizens Today. It is a discussion that we are going to have with a good number of panelists. They are all next to me, around me, and they are all ready to engage, not only amongst themselves, but with you. And I think we are going to kick off with a very short presentation of each of them from each perspective. They all have extraordinary experiences and they want to share with all of us. And hopefully we will be able to have a lot of time to listen to your comments, but in particularly to get your questions to the panelists. You know that education and the SDG 4 is critical that it is done in an equitable and with a quality issue on top of it, and the promotion of lifelong opportunities for all, particularly targeted to youth, but as well to adults, is critical. In this session, we are going to focus, as I said, on youth in particular and children. Without an educated young force, a country will have no bright future. I think it's a basic starting point that we can use it as a good element for the discussion. I'm going to introduce our first speaker. To my right, Dr. Yanghee Lee. She is UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar and former chair of the Committee of the Rights of the Child. Her experience as a strong, dedicated human rights defender is very important for framing the discussion we are looking at today from the point of view of the rights. So I'm going to ask Dr. Lee, education is a right that all the children, the youth have. Are we all contributing to upholding this right? Dr. Lee?
Thank you, Undersecretary General. Thank you for the kind introduction. It is a great pleasure here today at this very important conference for me to spend with you, this conference that is devoting to the achievement of SDG with a special emphasis on education for global citizenship. A heartfelt appreciation to all of you who has worked so hard to make this event possible, and a heartfelt, warm welcome to all the participants to our beautiful country. You asked this very pertinent question, is education a right? First, let me focus on the title of this panel, Children and Youth, Tomorrow's Global Citizen Today. Far too long have our children and youth been considered as tomorrow's leaders. Under this context, future leaders have not enjoyed appropriate treatment as the citizens and leaders of today. We have heard much rhetoric about the need to invest in children today in order for them to lead our world tomorrow. To a large extent, this is very true, but we need to change our mindset to view children as citizens of today with dignity and rights. To achieve the SDGs, The citizens of today must be respected and provided an optimum environment to live and grow up, to be global citizens that strive to build a culture of peace and social well-being for all and for generations to come. We already know that 58 million children globally are out of school, and nearly 100 million children do not complete compulsory primary education. Nearly half live in conflict-affected poor countries. Only 2% of humanitarian aid goes to education. An estimated 230,000 to 300,000 children globally are recruited as soldiers. 168 million children worldwide are engaged in child labor as of 2013. Of these, 85 million are engaged in hazardous work. The agricultural sector accounts for 60% of labor. Evidence shows, however, that providing all children with quality basic education could boost annual economic growth by 2% in low-income countries, and that for every $1 invested in education and skills will result in $10 in economic growth. Some economists, as James Heckman says, that every $1 invested in early childhood care and education brings back about roughly $12 back in benefits. I have spent 2 terms as the chairperson of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, so I will give you my views from a child rights-based perspective. First, what is the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child? It is a body that monitors state compliance to the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The convention, adopted in 1989 unanimously in the UNGA, now currently enjoys 196 countries. This has been instrumental in changing mindset of many people throughout the world. It is the strongest legal framework for children. With 41 substantive provisions, children are specified as human beings who are the subject of their own rights, just as adults are. A universal consensus was reached defining the child as below the age of 18 years unless majority is attained earlier under national law. It is the first comprehensive international human rights treaty that encompasses the guarantee of the protection of economic, social, cultural, civil, and special protection rights to all persons under the age of 18. The 4 overarching general principles of the CRC must be highlighted, especially if we are to achieve sustainable development goals together. They are non-discrimination, second, best interests of the child, life, survival, and development, and respect for the child's view. All stakeholders, including children, must recognize how different international and regional treaty obligations all fit into achieving the SDGs. Moreover, all duty bearers must be held accountable for the neglect, complicity, and failure to live up to their moral and legal promises. Discussions around achieving SDGs, ensuring free and compulsory education, providing quality education for boys and girls, even during conflict and natural disasters, must be carried out with the CRC as its legal and moral framework. I will not go into the details of the CRC, but I will proceed by sharing with you what it means to have a child's rights-based approach in developing policies and strategies to achieve what we are obliged to do under international human rights law. The provisions set forth in the CRC are largely non-derogable rights. Of course, one can argue whether or not economic, social, and cultural rights are non-derogable. What should a state do when it cannot guarantee these rights due to financial and other reasons? All human rights instruments have a clause allowing for reasonable accommodation or within maximum extent of their available resources, and moreover, calls for international cooperation whenever necessary. Education, quality education, that is a right. It is an inalienable right for all children. I believe that no discussion about education for global citizenship should be conducted without a concrete understanding and acceptance that education is an inalienable right. So then, what kind of education should be provided by the state? The late UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education, Katarina Tomasky, developed the 4 A's to education: availability, which is free and government funded; accessibility, non-discrimination and to include most marginalized; 3, acceptability, relevant quality content, culturally appropriate and non-discriminatory; and 4th, adaptability, which can evolve with changing social needs and can be adapted to fit specific context. I believe it is an excellent assessment tool and action tool. Human rights treaties oblige every state to respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of all people within its jurisdiction. Keeping this very important principle in mind, the 4 A's are the duties of this state and other actors, such as parents and teachers and non-state actors. I would like to share with you 2 important activities carried out by the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Every year they hold a very intense discussion day. The first intense discussion day was focused around children in armed conflict. This took place in 1996. As a result, an independent was expert to do a global study. It was Graça Machel, who in her groundbreaking report claimed children as zones of peace. She felt that this would be the only way that humankind will finally declare that childhood is inviolate and that all children must be spared the pernicious effects of armed conflict. Unfortunately, the committee was very concerned on how children's education was being compromised in situations of conflict and emergency situations. I personally saw the kind of horrific attacks on schools in the context of education, in the context of armed conflict. More disturbing is the fact that far too often, children continue to be used as human shields. In 2008, the topic was devoted to the rights of the child to education in emergency situations, defining emergency situations as situations which are man-made or natural disasters destroy within a short period of time the usual conditions of life, care, and education facilities for children, and therefore disrupt, deny, hinder progress, or delay the realization of the right to education. Education is an inalienable right that is inextricably linked to other fundamental rights and must be guaranteed to all children, both in and out of emergency situations. We have all heard that there is far too much public spending on defense. I'm sorry to say that only 2% of humanitarian aid goes to education. Humanitarian aid should not be considered as only emergency relief to save lives, but education should be included as a major component in the overall humanitarian aid. Schools are the only constant variables in the lives of children who suffer from repeated enduring disasters, man-made and natural equally. It should be used as a place where children can make sense out of the world and try to overcome hardship. 2 more important points I would like to leave with you are: how can the corporate sector assist in realizing human rights of children, achieving the SDGs together, and what should we keep in mind when galvanizing to raising compulsory education to secondary education? Regarding the first issue, businesses should abide by the principles of business and human rights. I will give just one example as food for thought. In the name of development, mega projects sometimes actually violate the rights of children in their lives. Large-scale land evictions uproot the entire family and jeopardize children's education. Moreover, resulting hazardous environmental consequences make it impossible for the community to continue. Finally, we must look carefully into the age of minimum labor and compulsory education. ILO Convention 138 states entry into employment is 15 for developed countries and 14 for developing countries. Where there is a discrepancy between age of labor and end of compulsory education, national laws, more often than not, children enter the labor force before completing their education. Strict monitoring and accountability measures must be put in place to all duty bearers to ensure that this does not happen. At the national level and at the international level, we must reconsider the age of entry into labor to take into account school leaving age. I thank you.
Thank you very much for your extremely clear words. I take from your presentation 3 sentences. 58 million of children out of school, over 100 million living without completing the basic education, and only 2% of humanitarian aid going to education. These figures resonate without any doubt in this room. And if there is a place where the rights of the children, as Dr. Lee has explained, have been abused, is Afghanistan. I have the honor to have in my left Nasrine Gross. She is the president and founder of the Roqia Center for Women's Rights, Studies, and Education in Afghanistan. Nasrine is an activist, is a person that has been fighting very hard for the rights that Dr. Lee has been mentioning. I would like to ask her, is Afghanistan advancing?
Undersecretary, yes and no. It's such a powerful question. I want to cry with all of you. Actually, good morning. It's so beautiful that in this conference I see so many young faces. I'm 70 years old and the world is yours. I come from Afghanistan. The population is supposedly 30 million, and 60% of it is below 25 years old. We have 9 million between the ages of 18 and 25 today. Literacy in Afghanistan stands at 30% for men and maybe 12 or 13% for women. There are many, many places where there are 1,000 households, and there is only one girl that has a 7th grade education. It's not just because we don't have schools, we don't have teachers, and on top of it, extremist ideology keeps feeding people saying, no, 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 your culture doesn't allow girls to go to school. It's an absolute lie. I went to school in Afghanistan. On top of it, since the US's Operation Enduring Freedom in 2001, schools have been opened for girls and also for boys, and there is a thirst for education. So the few schools that we have to bear the brunt of all these students coming into school, and the school day is 3 hours, because every school building has to house 3 and sometimes 4 shifts of students. So the school day begins at 7 in the morning, and can you imagine 5, 6-year-olds going to school at 7 in the morning in the middle of winter? So for me, where do I begin? I think one of the things that this roundtable is addressing is very important, and that is quality education. With 3 hours of the school day being 3 hours, we must pay attention to the quality. And believe you me, 11th graders don't know the 34 provinces of Afghanistan, or the sects and religions or languages that are in Afghanistan, or the neighbors of Afghanistan, let alone where America is. And I know, since yesterday that I arrived in Korea, I love it. But I know that 99.999% of Afghans cannot locate Korea. They think it's a dish of food. So how do we begin to have a global citizen in that situation? And for me, that is quality education with good textbooks and an emphasis on getting girls into schools. If we don't have girls that are going to secondary education, because most of them are taken out after 5th grade, imagine me, I'm scared for the next generation of girls in Afghanistan. How are we going to have women, educated women, to participate, to become global citizens? So we must find ways to help Afghan families send their daughters to school. Okay, the second point I would like to make, and imagine, this is from the perspective of Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is not a lonely place. There are other communities in the world the same way. I would like all of us to work on alleviating the impact of prolonged conflict and war on children, families, and societies. Inside Afghanistan, I would like to see programs that address PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome people. Nothing of the sort has happened, and maybe you haven't heard. Afghanistan on a weekly basis has suicide bombers going in the very crowded streets and exploding themselves and killing tens of people, and of course injuring mentally and spiritually hundreds of others that hear that explosion, that experience that explosion. I also want education to address children's fear and anger as a result of this much disruption of war. Afghanistan has been at an imposed war for the last 40 years. The other thing that I think would alleviate the impact of prolonged war is for the United Nations, this body of people I respect so much, to do some things more. One is, if it is the United Nations, it must help those countries that are supporting extremists and terrorists. It must help those countries stop having educational facilities for terrorists and suicide bombers that are coming inside Afghanistan, places like Afghanistan. In other words, it must develop better oversight of this kind of activity. The second thing that I think the United Nations can do is the fact that, I give you an example. We had a new government a year and a half ago, but before that, we had a minister of education that for 7 years reported 1,000 ghost schools, schools that didn't exist, with thousands of teachers that didn't exist, with millions of textbooks that didn't exist, cleaning ladies and orderlies in these schools that didn't exist, that amounted to $1.5 billion per year putting in his pocket. I know you are, This is the kind of corruption that a small country like Afghanistan cannot take care of. I know that SIGAR, the oversight place in America, has done it after the fact. But I would like the United Nations to look after this kind of corruption in time. It's extremely important, not only for what we have missed, but also in the culture of impunity, in the non-verbal encouragement to this kind of corruption we give to. Everybody knew it. Okay, I have 2 more things. One, the Sustainable Development Goals 4. I love kids. Yes, they are the future. But in a country like Afghanistan, where it's actually the adults that are illiterate, it's, yes. It's the mother and father that send their kid to school. And if they are illiterate, they do not encourage their children to go to school. They don't allow them. So I propose that SDG 4, the same way that Millennium Development Goal was this way, is too child-centric. For the good of the child, we must include in the SDG 4 some article about educating the adults. It's the adult that makes the decisions, that votes, that decides who the child gets married to, where it goes to school, or whether it goes to school. So we must pay some attention in SDG 4 to the adults, women and men. For the yes, we need this. I'm so glad, because Afghanistan is not an only place that this is happening. The other proposal I have is for the global citizenship. I am very concerned about the world for my grandchildren. I really am. And it's true that what happens in Afghanistan affects everywhere. It even affects New York, believe it or not. So what I suggest is that we need to actually define what a global citizen means, and we need to develop a global civics course that every school in the member, what do you call them, member nations? in the members of the United States, member states, that in every school we teach this. It's not very difficult. It's easy to develop the civics, global civics course, and it begins in the school. It's easier. I cannot teach a 50-year-old how to conserve potable water. He goes and washes his SUV, but in school we can teach them. The other thing I would like to suggest, and it's all you beautiful young people, America had a very successful program in the 60s. It was called the Peace Corps. I would like a global Peace Corps run by the United Nations. All you beautiful people young people from the advanced countries coming to places like Afghanistan and teaching them modernity. You can do it, and we need it. And United Nations is that place to begin. I want to stop here, but thank you, and be with us, and think about these things, and remain committed. Thank you.
Ms. Gross, we are delighted with your passion. We are delighted with your energy, and even more, the proposals to the UN, very specific, and to all of you, to the global citizens. But we are also shocked about some of the figures you mentioned. The degree of illiteracy, 30% women, 12%, 30% men literacy, and 12% women. This is extraordinarily challengeful. Let me now give the floor to Wendy Carbajal Sotelo. She is director of the Comité de Paz in Zihuatanejo in the state of Guerrero. She's going to be addressing all of us in Spanish, and I would like to frame her presentation, if possible, a little bit compacted. How is it possible to advance on education in a society like Mexico that is immersed in violence and with such a degree of inequalities? Wendy, para usted.
Muy buenos días a todos. Me siento muy honrada de estar aquí con ustedes y me da mucho gusto que estén ustedes aquí. Mi nombre es Wendy Carbajal Sotelo. Represento a la organización no gubernamental Comité de Paz en Zihuatanejo. Zihuatanejo es un lugar turístico que se encuentra en el estado de Guerrero, muy cerca de Acapulco. Este comité ha sido creado en el año 2012 como parte de una propuesta para hacer de Zihuatanejo la primera ciudad de paz en México y en el estado. Formamos alianzas estratégicas con la Organización Internacional Ciudades Internacionales de Paz y Peace Day 365 para poder lograr la certificación. Con el paso del tiempo, el Comité de Paz fue adquiriendo mayor responsabilidad en la construcción de la cultura de paz a través de la educación. Nosotros vivimos en un estado muy violento, el más violento del país, el más violento de México, así que buscamos siempre privilegiar la paz y el diálogo. Estas circunstancias de violencia nos han motivado a hacer constantes llamados al reconocimiento y protección de los derechos humanos, de los niños, de los jóvenes, pero sobre todo a que tengan una educación digna, que tengan una vida en paz. Hoy en día, la misión del comité es apoyar a nuestra comunidad con acciones educativas enfocadas a generar la paz duradera que tanto necesitamos en nuestro estado de Guerrero. Siempre tratando de apegarnos al desarrollo sostenible, a los objetivos del desarrollo sostenible de la ONU. Nosotros tenemos relaciones institucionales y tenemos alianzas con muchas asociaciones y juntos, entre todos, formamos el Comité de Paz. Entre las organizaciones que más nos apoyan está nuestra máxima casa de estudios, que es la Universidad Autónoma de Guerrero, y que, por cierto, me acompaña la hija del rector de la universidad, está aquí en su representación por el interés que tenemos en la educación global. Yo soy profesora de la Universidad Autónoma de Guerrero y la universidad ha hecho convenios educativos, entre ellos con la Universidad de Wayne en Detroit, y gracias a esos convenios, a esas relaciones globales, hemos podido consolidar visitas con representantes de programas de educación y de educación para la paz, incluyendo el Centro de Estudios para la Paz y la Resolución de Conflictos en la Universidad de Wayne. Eso nos ha permitido que en nuestro municipio, en Zihuatanejo, se den constantes capacitaciones en construcción de paz, tanto a funcionarios, a profesores y alumnos de las diferentes escuelas. También forman parte del Comité de Paz el Tecnológico de la Costa Grande, la Universidad Tecnológica, UNIDEP, CONALEP, Club Rotario, la Oficina de Turismo en Zihuatanejo, la Cruz Roja, el Comité de Ciudades Hermanas y Centros de Integración Juvenil, que es una organización que se dedica a la prevención de las adicciones. Dentro de las actividades de nuestro Comité de Paz, hemos tenido seminarios de construcción de paz y resolución de conflictos para funcionarios públicos. Hemos tenido Peace Webinars para estudiantes de nivel superior. Hemos tenido conferencias sobre educación para la paz y diversidad en el salón de clases para profesores de nivel medio superior y superior. Tenemos actividades culturales y recreativas para promover la paz en los jóvenes, como son Semana por la Paz, Yoga por la Paz, Caminatas de la Paz, Rallies por la Paz, Multimedia por la Paz y Cortos por la Paz. El Corto por la Paz fue una iniciativa de los jóvenes de la ciudad de Zihuatanejo y fue presentada en la ONU el día 21 de septiembre en el marco del Día Internacional de la Paz. Celebramos anualmente el Día Internacional de la Paz y tenemos la ceremonia de certificación de Zihuatanejo como ciudad de paz. Cada año tratamos de reafirmarnos como una ciudad que promueve la paz. Hemos trabajado mucho promoviendo la cultura de paz en la ciudad de Zihuatanejo, pero falta mucho por hacer, sobre todo, como les decía, porque estamos en el estado que ha sido catalogado como el más violento del país, el segundo más pobre de la Ciudad de México y el segundo estado con mayor rezago educativo en México. Nuestros profesores también están inconformes con algunas reformas educativas, que más bien parecen reformas laborales. Ellos no están de acuerdo con esas reformas y han iniciado movimientos para que esas reformas puedan tomarlos en cuenta. Urge para nosotros una solución para los niños y jóvenes de Guerrero. No queremos repetir la desaparición de otros 43 estudiantes, como en septiembre del 2014, estudiantes que buscaban una educación digna, porque la escuela donde estos jóvenes estudiaban, Ayotzinapa, es una escuela carente de todo, y ellos buscaban buscaban ser escuchados para tener mejoras en su calidad de la educación. Al contrario de todo esto, nosotros estamos aquí porque queremos ayudar y queremos fortalecer las condiciones educativas de los jóvenes, no solo de México, del planeta entero. Sabemos que la clave está en la educación, está en los valores, está en la justicia y está en las alternativas de desarrollo sustentable para combatir la pobreza y la desigualdad. Queremos que los niños y jóvenes de hoy se formen como ciudadanos del mundo, ciudadanos bien preparados para hacer frente a los retos que vivimos, que aprendan y sepan defender sus derechos con dignidad y con responsabilidad. Para lograrlo, es importante apoyarlos a desarrollar sus habilidades, sus perspectivas, su pensamiento crítico y la responsabilidad, volvemos, en la toma de decisiones. Es necesario que los jóvenes y los niños reconozcan y usen sus áreas fuertes individuales para hacer una diferencia positiva en sus comunidades. Que los jóvenes y niños sean conscientes de todo lo que pueden hacer para mejorar sus comunidades y el mundo. Queremos fomentar en nuestros niños el respeto a la vida, a la diversidad, que se indignen frente a la injusticia, pero que también tengan la capacidad de transformar esa realidad injusta de una manera consciente. La educación de nuestros niños y jóvenes debe ser coordinada de manera global e integral, tanto por los gobiernos, por los profesores, los padres de familia y la sociedad en general. Sabemos que si trabajamos en conjunto de manera propositiva, sin imposiciones, favoreciendo siempre el diálogo y la capacitación, vamos a lograr una educación global. Ya no podemos vivir más en el mundo del yo, tenemos que vivir en el mundo del nosotros, un mundo global, donde tengamos conciencia de que es importante nuestra actitud y que dependemos de nuestra actitud hacia los demás. Es evidente que no solo necesitamos una solución educativa, una solución material, una solución económica, es prioridad una solución educativa, donde los jóvenes aprendan y aprovechen, que tengan acceso a la vanguardia, en donde ellos se encuentren esa interconexión con todos los jóvenes del mundo y les duela no solo lo que pasa en su país, sino lo que pasa en otros países. Y buscar entre todos una sociedad balanceada para poder lograr esta revolución educativa. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Wendy, por haber sido capaz de construir una red de hacedores de paz en un lugar tan extraordinariamente violento como es el estado de Guerrero. We all remember the disappearance of the 43 students that have brought this case into all the front pages in the world. So we really commend your efforts. Now I'm going to give the floor to Ediola Pashollari. She is the Secretary General of the World Assembly of Youth. We want to hear from her how the youth organizations can help support the development of education.
Thank you, Undersecretary General. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Young people and youth organizations play a pivotal role in order to establish or achieve global citizens. and that's done through formal, non-formal, and informal education. All of these platforms need to provide the right skills and knowledge in order for the young people to be adequate for this current century. I believe and promote that today's youth are extraordinary in many ways. But the two key facts may define it as the most critical generation of our time. First is the largest cohort of young people to ever lived on the planet. And second, 87% of which live in developing countries that typically struggle to provide adequate social safety net for all. At World Assembly of Youth, we believe that education is the most effective way to break the cycle of poverty, improve food security, especially in poor rural areas, reduce infant and maternal mortality rate, and break the generational cycle to child marriage. It can drive economic growth and reduce conflict levels. As the way forward in delivering our activities, we have developed a strategic plan that acts as a roadmap to our activities. The Millennium Plan of Action, or else known as MPAC, which is developed and approved during General Assembly. So in 2014, our plan of action focused on the role of youth on sustainable development, and education is one of the key goals in it. Its focus is on the current issues that affect young people around the world. Youth and youth leaders should be pivotal players in tackling global development issues and play a key role in decision-making process at all levels. We all know about SDGs, and we all know about Goal 4. So what do we do? What is our role as young people and NGOs to implement that? That's the most important thing, because major progress has been made towards increasing access to education at all levels and increasing enrollment rates in school, particularly for women and girls. But like my colleague mentioned earlier on, there are countries where education is not even known at all. So how do we get involved as young people or as an NGO? Being a coordinating body of national youth councils, and we have 140 member countries, we have a huge disappointment when it comes to education, because you have those developing countries where education is not even recognized or is not even allowed, especially for girls, in case of Afghanistan or Yemen for that matter, because of the conflict that is happening around the world. So if we don't have the formal education, can we as CSOs or NGOs provide the non-formal education and informal education for all? Yes, we can. Because the current use of world resources is inadequate and unsustainable. As the gap between rich and poor widens, poverty continues to deny millions of people around the world their basic right. Education is a powerful tool to changing the world, because tomorrow's adults and the children and the youth, young people, they are the one which we are educating today. Education for global citizenship encourages children and youth and young people to care about the planet and to develop empathy with an active concern to those with whom they will share it. But simply, education improves life's outcomes at all levels across the globe. Access to and completion of secondary level education compounds these benefits mindfold, but it also never should be late for those beyond the age of compulsory schooling who have missed out. Historically, young people have always spoken out against injustice and discrimination, and will continue to do so, because like UN Secretary General mentioned yesterday, young people should raise up their voice. NGOs should do the same thing and promote the rights of young people, promote the 17 SDGs in order for us to live a wonderful life. It's time to ensure that the voices of young people are given a platform, that they will have to play a meaningful role in shaping the future. As long as governments keep their promise to provide quality education for all, we will reap the benefits. But we also should collaborate together, because all stakeholders have a meaningful role in achieving education for all, at all levels, including primary, secondary, and even university. But also, non-formal and informal education. It's a process that needs to be recognized. And that has to be on gender balance, including rural and urban youth at the same time, and that should be of a quality education. And like UN said, no one should be left behind. And we should make sure that no one is left behind, because every young person matters. They do matter now, they do matter tomorrow. So raise up your voice, guys, because we are here for you. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ediola. We trust on the role of the youth organizations like the one that you are leading, in particular in order to advance on what you mentioned, which is the non-formal education. Now I'm going to give the floor to the voice of the teachers, critical in all this process of advancing education. So we have with us Teopista Birungi Mayanja. She's founder of the Uganda National Teachers Union, and she's the Deputy Director of Education Services in the Kampala Capital City Authority. What is the role of the teachers in order to advance in quality education? Do the teachers get the support they ought to be given? The floor is yours.
Good morning to you all. I am a senior teacher. I've taught for the last 36 years. I've taught, I've been a principal, I've trained the teachers, and I've worked as an advocate, and I've sat on the Global Union Federation of Teachers for about 6 years. So I'm bringing here the voice of teachers globally, organized in Education International, a voice of over 30 million teachers. We define education, not just education to provide the skills for employment, but the education that can help the young people, the youth, to get skills, knowledge, competencies, and attitudes that will help them to appreciate their own and other people's cultural heritage. And this is the only way we shall have a community with peace, coexistence, understanding, and a tolerance. Then we can talk about a globalized community. And the teachers at the center of a process of such education. That's what we call quality education. But teachers cannot provide this quality education unless we address the few things I want to highlight here, then they will be able to do it. The first one, the teaching profession needs to be made attractive. Globally, the public due regard to the teaching profession is getting low. So countries, including the United Nations, must make the teaching profession attractive by addressing the conditions linked to it, the conditions of work, the professional autonomy, and the other continuous professional development. We need to address the financing of education so that it addresses such policies related to teachers, because it takes the biggest part of the budget. We also need to address global conflicts. The global conflicts that have failed the teachers to be able to provide education. We cannot provide education to a child who is in the camp. The education given there cannot be holistic to enable the child to get the kind of education we are talking about. We are also talking about safe school environments. I cannot mention, you all know the many incidents of unsafe school environments which are influencing the teachers' work. We are also talking about the privatization of education. As teachers, we are talking about public education which is of quality, because then it is the only education which takes care of the poor. And it is the one which allows people to live with dignity and which is inclusive. We are also against the education assessment, which talks about only standardized tests, because children and youth minds are not standardized. So the tests we are talking about are not testing the skills which we need to live together in peace. So we need inclusive education which provides all the skills of coexistence. And above all, we are talking about civil society groups working with the teacher unions in order to become global advocates that must hold our countries accountable for the provision of quality education to everyone. So I leave now these few issues, and these are the ones around which we need to develop recommendations. How do we finance education? How do we make the teaching profession attractive? How do we support the teachers? How do we mobilize the community as civil society to support the teachers so that in turn they provide the education we want? These are the kind of recommendations we need to come up with.
Thank you very much, Teopista. Thank you very much, Teopista, for your very specific points. Without a good teacher, education cannot advance, and good teachers have to be supported. That's a clear conclusion. As you see from until now, this discussion about education and children has been a discussion among women, and from very powerful women. So I'm going now to pass the floor to our two colleagues that are going to talk. One, first of all, Darren Oh, he's going to address the role of the corporates, the private sector, which is a controversial issue considering what Teopista has been saying about privatization. But I'm sure he has a good case for us to show what the private sector can do to improve education.
Thank you, Secretary General. Good morning. I'm Darren Oh, key account representative for Tyvek, DuPont Korea. It is such a great honor to sit next to great people who are doing magnificent works for youth and education. 안녕하세요. 저는 DuPont 코리아에서 온 오장현이라고 합니다. So DuPont is a founding member of UN Global Compact, and we are committed to sustainable development goals. Today, I'm here for representing DuPont, but more than that, I'm here to share such great achievement which is made by today's youth. So I want to share some video clip first. So let's share the video first, please.
10 years in the making, the largest book in the world on the subject of peace, completed by a group of middle schoolers from Groton Dunstable School District in Groton, Massachusetts, has its public unveiling at the JFK Presidential Library tonight. It's the anticipated launch of what hopes to be a world tour, biggest book in the world on the subject of peace.
Miss Betsy, young men and women, it has taken you 10 years to create this extraordinary book. At 12 feet high and 10 feet wide, it truly lives up to its name. Now you have 3,500 messages of peace from around the world, and with mine, you have 3,501. What an amazing achievement, and what a fantastic commitment. Your Peace Club is an inspiration to the world.
Over the course of the past 10 years.
So as you can see, it's about the big book, big peace book. So I want to share some more backgrounds about this peace book with you. This big book project has been started from 10 years ago. As you've seen from the videos, 10 of middle school students of the Groton-Dunstall Regional School Districts, Massachusetts, United States. After 9/11 tragedy, they start concerned about the peace of the world where they are living in. And not only just concerned, they want to act and to find out how they can be helpful for the keeping of world peace. So they asked their teachers what kind of activities that they can do. And the teacher, actually, she has advice to her students, why don't you ask the answers to the global leaders, not only just the politicians, leaders or activists. So they starting sending messages to the leaders and asking them to send sending messages or calls for world peace. From the start, it was only 10 people, 10 students. But once the thing's going, it's become a more larger groups. So at the end, it has become over 450 students were gathered for this project. And they call themselves as the boom makers and the Dreamers Club. So after all the decades, they could gather more than 3,500 artworks, letters, and calls, including the UN General Secretary Ban Ki-moon, and also former South African President Nelson Mandela, and former US President Jimmy Carter, Mayanja Lee. So they could gather many peace messages. And then once they gathered the messages, they really wanted to make it as a book. But if they want to make a book, they would rather to make a huge book. So one of the college students were recommend them to use one of our DuPont products, which is a very strong material to be printed. So as a corporate living in this society with DuPont, also as one of the founding members for UN Global Compact, we were willing to sponsor this this word's always hard to pronounce. So this wonderful word, we willing to sponsor this for the projects. So as like I said, as the corporate which is living inside of this society along with our youth, we thought that this is one of our responsibility to make them to materialization of their dreams and their hopes and their willingness for keeping a peace. So we will keep supporting this kind of activities, and and also at the same time we'll also playing a role as the CSR in this society also. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing this experience, which is really unique, which is a very practical example of supporting initiatives for the promotion of peace from different schools, in this case, a school in the United States. Now I'm going to give the floor, before I pass the word to you, to my colleague, Ahmad Alhendawi. Ahmed is a rock star in the United Nations, not because he sings rock, maybe as well, but in his private time, but because he's the person in the organization that mobilizes the youth as never before, as a special envoy of the Secretary General to ensure that the voice of the young people is heard, and to ensure that the youth involve themselves in the United Nations. He's moved a long way since the day he was appointed a couple or 3 years ago. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Cristina. Thank you very much for your kind words, for your leadership, and also for this very special panel. It shows women leadership practice, and we're playing wings, the men here. So it's great to be part of this panel and part of this conference. Congratulations, and making sure that youth are well represented at this conference. And I think if you go to the breakout sessions, you'll find how the youth contributions is really changing the way we discuss some of these issues. I often say, and as being the youth envoy of the United Nations, I keep telling colleagues at the UN that if you think youth participation is a favor to young people, then we're not getting it, because youth participation is a favor to the United Nations. By bringing youth to the UN, by bringing youth to the governments and to all ministries, we are doing a favor to ourselves, because youth are going to participate. I mean, they have plenty of ways and tools to engage. So I think it's wise for governments, for organizations to open up, and that's the biggest favor we can do to ourselves and for the sustainability of our work. I think everything has been said, more or less, but not everybody has said it, so I could repeat some of the messages. I think 4 key messages I want to talk about today. The first is, in the transition from the MDGs to the Sustainable Development Goals, we all recognize that education and enrollment to education, start with the primary education, is one of the main unfinished agenda in the Sustainable Development Goals, or in the MDGs. And that, of course, migrated to the Sustainable Development Goals, but also with expansion. With the MDGs, we were talking about enrollment, mainly to primary education. That was the target. And now we recognize that it has to go way beyond only enrollment to primary education to talk about quality as well, and talk about even enrollment to post-primary education, which was already recognized as part of the targets and the proposed indicators now to the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I think if there's one take we all recognize, that even talking about just enrollment is a challenge. Before we get to the question of quality education, before even we get to the question of post-primary education, just the simple question of enrollment to primary education, we're still talking about close to 58 million or 60 million children who are out of school. So that is still a big challenge. So just to put our feet in the ground, we have to remember that even that target was not materialized, basically, in the Millennium Development Goals. So as we transition to the SDGs, that's what we have to remind ourselves of. The question of enrollment is still far from being achieved. And of course, that exacerbated by situation and of conflicts, and young people and children are affected by conflicts. So we have to do a better job and keep talking about enrollment, because I know like we all have this tendency in talking about quality education, post-primary education, but that's far from reach if we're not talking even about the simple question of access and enrollment to primary education. That's not to say that we have to lower our expectations, our ambitions. I'm not saying that, but I think we have to recognize that it's a big challenge, and we have to do a better job there. We're talking about the figures, for example, 2% of humanitarian affairs. In fact, that figure is less than 2%, it's 1.5% of the money spent in a humanitarian response is being spent in education. I'm going to come back to that later on, but that speaks also, I mean, to the national allocation. If you go to the World Bank figures and you see some of the countries who are so desperate to invest more in education, you'll find from the national budget, one of the countries that is close to one of the countries that was highlighted in our discussion today, they spend only 4% of their national budget in education, of the government's expenditure, while they should at least spend 15%. So you see, even in non-emergency settings, the spending in education is not being prioritized. So which leads us to that notion of whether we're walking the talk or not. And that's where the SDGs is very important, because there's a collective commitment that we have to make sure that governments are honoring this commitment, are held accountable to what they committed themselves to achieve. Now, that, of course, leads me to the question of quality education, and is very much tied to our discussion today about the discussion around global or education for global citizenship. I think what was featured well in the education, the Secretary General's initiative, Education First, is that the fact that reading and writing and numeracy skills are not enough. We have to educating people to become global citizens. They have to be taught how to think, not what to think. They have to gain the tools of being critical analysts, and they have to engage in the global economy so they could be truly global citizens. And that question about quality education is extremely important, but we have to tackle it in different, by analyzing what competencies that would include. I was part of a co-chair for a task force that was set up at the global level together with the Brookings Institute to try to define what competencies are needed for global citizenship in the education system. At UNESCO, they made a very important contribution, if you would like to read more about it, by defining what competencies, what does that mean in terms of competencies that educators and education system experts would understand and what they need to translate. Now, to my surprise, for example, my favorite document ever, the only document I read I couldn't disagree with a single word written on it, is the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. And I could just take a survey now and ask you, how many of you get education on one of the classes, or at least like get that Universal Declaration for Human Rights embedded in your formal curriculums? Raise your hand. Well, imagine that the most important piece of work that the international community collectively managed to reach a consensus, which is the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, is not well featured in our education system. And for me, that's the basis of not even a global citizenship. That's for any citizenship to be practiced. You have to base it based on the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. That leads me to the third element, which is education emergencies. I'm mindful of the time, but I really have to talk about the very important, we just concluded the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul. The week before I was in the Central African Republic with young people who are severely affected by conflicts there. You see this whole thing about what leads young people to join armed groups, militias, or violent extremistic groups. I think it's a simple math. Huh? You can read all the analysis you want in the world, but I was just reminded in a city called Kagabandoro in the Central African Republic, where 500 youth who used to fight each other, Christians and Muslims in that city, they dropped the guns once they were offered an opportunity for education or for employment. It's as simple as that. You can spend so much time in analyzing the different trends and applying all these different theories about counter-violent extremism, but you could apply the very simple notion of the most dangerous thing in this world is a young person who is totally hopeless, have no prospects for a better future, totally marginalized, and then you wonder what's happening in the world, why the world is going so wrong. I think I keep reminding when we talk about the Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security, that the right question to be asked is not why some of these radical groups are winning. The question is, why are we losing in the first place this generation of young people? And to win them, you have to offer them opportunities. Indeed, there are alarming figures and numbers. 600 million youth live in conflict zones, fragile security situation, only less than 2% being spent in education. But I just want to bring to this conversation what I call it the black hole in peace-building efforts. You know, even when you spend and you respond, to humanitarian crisis by adding education, by expanding the classical response, shelter, food, medicine, etc., and you expand that to add education. That education only goes up in best case scenario up to 16 years old. And many places not even up to 16 years old. And the black hole is that age group, 16 and above. From 16 to 25, when you go and find, if you go to some of the refugee camps, some of these youth, the only opportunities they are offered by the other militias and the armed groups or radical groups. I think we have to do a better job as an international community, and that was part of my engagement at the World Humanitarian Summit, and I invite you to read about what we call the Youth Compact at the World Humanitarian Summit. We were very much talking about the need to close that black hole. These are some of the points. I'm mindful of time, so I would leave it here and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
But I really want to give the floor to the colleagues that have been so patiently listening to our panelists. I have two topics. While you are thinking about your questions, are getting ready. Where is the microphone? Who is going to move the microphone around? It's standing. So just go online and get ready for it. I want to address two issues. One of the resources, and another one is of the corruption, which are very much linked. I would like to ask Dr. Lee very specifically, how are we going to be able to advance on the rights if not sufficient resources are allocated to the youth, to the teachers, to the educational systems as a whole?
Well, shall I answer it
Yes,
now?
please.
Yes, we need to have clear legislative reform, and legislation is just a starting place. There has to be accountability on the budget. The budget has to be transparent. It has to be known to the public. And this is where the CSOs and the NGOs can come in partnership, is to monitor for the spending, government spending, the public spending. Of course, as I said, not all countries do have the equipped financial availability, but they should be spent to children first. Children should be considered as the priority, and that's what we call the third principle of CRC, is the best interests of the child. Thank you.
Thank you for this concise reply. There is a question about corruption. Your words of what has happened in Afghanistan really touch us. Is it being addressed?
Yes, corruption is addressed. We have several commissions. The President and the Prime Minister are chairing commissions. Civil society is also developing its own organizations to report corruption, to work on corruption. But I want to actually get it a bit more universal and global. Corruption in a country like Afghanistan is very difficult because it's from the bottomest person to the highest person that is on the take. So one of the things in a war-affected culture where transient values are the norm is to find ways to bring back ethics of working. This is extremely important. So many people in Afghanistan tell me, oh, Nasrine, you know, people think that ethics and politics don't mix. And you know, I actually think that the basis of politics is ethics. It's serving people. And so we need to get back into that culture. We also have to think about something else. In a country like Afghanistan, where capacity isn't all that big, most cabinet ministries do not have the capacity to actually use their budgets. So when you have this much budget and for so many schools, and you know that you don't have so many builders, so many project managers, you may want to think about it in a different way. I mean, I don't have the solution. I just know that this is one of the things. The other thing is, so far in Afghanistan, there is the culture of impunity for the good of the people. You don't want to make a powerful person your enemy, or his nephew, or his chauffeur. I think, and many, many people in Afghanistan think, that we need to actually publicly try and punish some of these corrupt people. This minister that took, what, $11 billion in 7 years is scot-free. So are the entire number of people who were with him. One or two of these people, and some people will think twice to do this. And finally, I think that this oversight I'm talking about, most of the money coming into Afghanistan is donor money. You don't realize it, but every single person that works in the government of Afghanistan, including all those teachers, their salary is a donor money. Yes, did you get it? Every single salary of the government of Afghanistan is donor money. And I want all those donors, including the United Nations, to own up to their own responsibility about this money. We need to have stiffer oversight of the donors for this money. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the floor is over here. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Clive from Hong Kong, Eden Prize Foundation. We give the largest education award in the world. So I would like to follow up what Under Secretary General and also Ms. Gross mentioned. Apart from resources, I think one of the most important things is in education is about approaches and strategies. As you mentioned that sometimes there's lack of capacity in using those resources. So are there any strategies and approaches to help to use the resources effectively from local level or international level? Thank you.
Good. We'll take another question so that we can dynamize a little bit the conversation. Yes, please, madam.
Thank you. My name is Eda Duncan. I'm coming from KDI School, but I'm Tanzanian. When we speak about education for global citizenship, but realizing that within the global level, we still have gap between developing countries and developing countries and developing countries. At the same time, now we want to go global, while some people, they didn't get quality education in local level. I think this gap is supposed to be addressed for future purposes. For example, these kids in MDGs, as my brother said, our government achieved to get, what can I say, adding more schools and enroll a lot of schools, but still there is a gap and there is still challenge on the quality of education according to the number of books that are available in those schools as well as the number of teachers. Therefore, what I think is that how to address this issue for you as a panel, before jumping from education for global citizens, I think we need to address local problems before going global. Thank you.
Good. Another question, another topic, and then we will spread the answers amongst. Yes.
Muy buenas tardes. Nací en Guatemala, entonces esta pregunta le quiero hacer a Wendy. Ella mencionó sobre la Comité de Paz, entonces quisiera saber si esa Comité de Paz también está enfocada en todo Centroamérica o en qué partes de área. Y también usted habló sobre las técnicas que se deberían de usar para cambiar la forma de pensar de los jóvenes. Y como nací en Guatemala y viví en Guatemala, yo sé cómo las personas piensan de alguna manera y sé que las escuelas públicas también no tienen una forma de pensar ampliamente. Entonces, quisiera saber cuáles son las tácticas que se están usando para poder cambiar la forma de pensar de los jóvenes en estos días.
Good. 3 questions, one on resources and strategies. Maybe I'll give the floor to Teopista for this one. Another question on the gap, whether we have to focus first locally before we go global. Maybe Nasrine would like to answer that question, and then there is one specific question for Wendy. So the first one for you, Teopista. Then we'll go to you.
I'm not sure whether he was referring to strategies for teaching, but what I've heard, which is very pertinent to me, is my daughter from Tanzania, sorry. Okay. She was wondering, and she's advising that we shouldn't go global before we go local. But the context of the global education cities, the kind of global citizenship education we are talking about here can also be provided locally. Global citizenship refers to people who coexist, who can live together, utilize the knowledge they have. But the example I want to give you, you are from East Africa, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi. These people are locally living in East Africa, but among us themselves have got conflicts. Conflicts run from home, from the school, from the community, even at country level. So when we talk about the approaches to teaching this kind of global education citizenship, we don't mean that the Tanzanians should very quickly come and live in Korea, but they must come with the skills and the competences and the attitudes right from home. So we are talking about it even at home, locally where we are coming from, contextualize it and allow people to live together, to work together. Secondly, someone is talking about the mindset of the youth. I talked about when I was presenting the aspect of education assessment. We need to be careful. The majority of the indicators of Sustainable Development Goal number 4 must not push us to standardized testing. Because standardized testing is only testing knowledge. It is testing a lot of knowledge. But creativity and the people living together is obtained from subjects like sports. By the way, I'm a sports teacher. Sports, theater, acting, art and the crafts. These are subjects which are not tested in standard form. And these are subjects which provide the skills for people to live together, as you have seen. Because when we go for Olympics fora, we don't begin to ask ourselves in terms of colors, in terms of height, in terms of size. But you see how very quickly we bond. And those are the skills we need. This is what I would like to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you. Local and global. Do we have to fix first the local issues before we strive for global citizenship?
Well, I think it's not a sequential thing. It's not that we fix everything global and then local and then we go to global. I think we need to strike a balance. There are things about global that I think are very urgent for everybody, like climate change, like water, like energy, like some of these ethics we've been talking about. I think that locally it's very important to reach every kid, to reach actually every adult. Dr. Lee was talking about education being an inalienable right of the child. I propose to you, and I'm sure she agrees with me, education is an inalienable right of every human being, regardless of age. I think we need to take care of these things locally. I would hate to think that we think globally and then forget some of the beautiful nuances of culture and history and precedents and tradition that we have. I think we should do the local stuff, but we should also develop a program of the global citizenship. And if I may take 3 sentences, I don't think that the curriculum of global civics course is a finite, finalized form of a book. I think it's an iterative thing. There are a few subjects that are very pressing that we can develop that for informational purpose and how to do things and put them in schools around the world. And based on the success of that and based on what we understand global citizenship to be, we can add more to that curriculum. That's what I think.
I have been told that we can stretch 15 more minutes because the discussion is really very interesting. Voy a dar la palabra a Wendy para el ejemplo que nos pedía la compañera de Guatemala.
Bueno, el Comité de Paz en Zihuatanejo es, por el momento, el único comité que tenemos de paz. Fue creado por una iniciativa local enfocada en un principio en el sector turístico. Yo les comentaba que Zihuatanejo es un lugar turístico que está dentro del estado de Guerrero, que es el más violento del país, y queríamos una imagen más pacífica para que el turista fuera a Zihuatanejo. Sin embargo, cambió totalmente la perspectiva que teníamos, la visión, porque nos dimos cuenta de que no es tan importante la imagen, es más importante la raíz, la esencia de una localidad que se compromete en la construcción de paz y del diálogo. En un principio sí recibíamos muchas burlas de cómo un comité de paz en el lugar más violento de México, que no había condiciones, pero poco a poco los jóvenes se fueron involucrando más organizaciones, más asociaciones que querían estar dentro de ese comité para trabajar en conjunto con los jóvenes. Los jóvenes en Guerrero son temerosos, tenemos mucha violencia por parte del crimen organizado. Yo siempre digo que Guerrero no es un estado violento, Guerrero es un estado violentado por el crimen organizado, por la corrupción. Sin embargo, su gente es muy cálida y quiere progresar. Entonces, está muy cansada de tanta violencia y estamos iniciando con más trabajo porque entonces la gente se empieza a involucrar más con el Comité de Paz y quieren formar parte del Comité de Paz y quieren hacer más actividades en pro de la cultura de la paz que nos surge en México, en nuestro estado. Y de ahí es que surge este comité y que tiene planes ya de extenderse en la mayoría de las ciudades del estado de Guerrero y nos estamos apoyando precisamente mucho con la Universidad Autónoma de Guerrero, porque bueno, en parte de que yo trabajo ahí me involucro con todos los maestros, el rector de la universidad tiene mucha visión también y sabe de las necesidades que tenemos en el estado y pretendemos ya hacer un comité estatal, un comité de paz del estado de Guerrero, donde se involucren todas las organizaciones que están a nivel local, a nivel estatal.
Os deseamos muchísima suerte. I'm going to take 2 questions from that row and 2 questions from this one. Yes, gentlemen. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is a fantastic panel. My name is Kelly O'Donnell, psychologist from Geneva. I represent the World Federation for Mental Health, and I'm also involved actively with a United Nations agency in developing trauma and stress training for humanitarian aid workers and for peacekeepers. My question for the panel and for all of us really is it possible to include stress and trauma training, trauma awareness in our global civics curriculum and our world citizenship curriculum, and indeed in the outcome document which we're trying to put together here? I say this for 2 quick reasons. First of all, trauma is mentioned in the overview of our current roundtable. It says post-conflict situations, including effective measures to deal with trauma. So we're already emphasizing trauma, and a few of our panelists have emphasized it. And secondly and finally, the very important statistic from the World Bank's World Development Report 2011, it focused on trauma, where 1.5 billion fellow humans live in situations of great instability, surrounded by violence, where there are concrete threats to their physical and psychological integrity. 1.5 billion people living in unstable, violent places where there's great threats to them. So how could we incorporate this devastating human reality into the types of training and awareness that we want to cultivate here in the conference and beyond in our global citizenship education?
Very good point. The lady?
Hi, I am a student studying economics here in South Korea. I have 2 very brief questions for Mr. Darren Oh. I myself also believe that private sector do play a very important role in terms of promoting any forms of education, in this case, global citizenship education. Can you tell me some of the projects or programs that you have or is planning to carry out in Korea? Probably something similar to the video clip that you showed us. And second, would you like to give us a brief story of some challenges DuPont had to go through in implementing any forms of promotion of global citizenship education around the world, including Korea? Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Yes, we'll take two from this side. Yes, lady.
Hi, my question is also for Mr. Oh. My name is Rena Zhu. I'm a student at Lehigh University, and I also represent the American Association of University Women. I'm super impressed with the project. As a youth who has a very global conscience, it's so great seeing kids who are so young also get involved. So my question is, how can or does DuPont plan to create a culture that promotes the SDGs and education with other for-profit corporations, or if they plan on motivating making this a larger scale thing for the corporate world? Thank you.
Good. Second question, yes?
Bonjour tout le monde. Ma question est pour Madame Nasrine. Je suis très ému par votre... Ça va? Okay. Je suis très ému par votre présentation et je sens votre conviction. Je sens votre conviction dans votre présentation et votre amour pour l'Afghanistan et son futur. Je m'appelle Samuel et je représente l'Association des citoyens du monde. Je veux vous demander une question personnelle. Partagez-nous une histoire positive que vous avez vue et sentie, des actes de bonté, des actes de conscience et des actes du cœur, pour que je sois inspiré. Je ne demande pas au niveau mondial, mais au niveau entre être humain et être humain, pour être inspiré par une Afghanistane. Merci.
Good. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to give the first question to Ms. Lee on the issue of stress, post-trauma. How do we ensure that this right is also embedded in our educational plans?
As I said earlier, that 196 countries are parties to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. That means all the countries in the world, more than the UN member states. And this is a legal obligation. And in the CRC and in our general recommendations and our concluding observations to each individual state party review, we include that there has to be education and psychosocial rehabilitation, including PTSD or other psychosocial disorders for general and more specifically in terms of in conflict situations or even in natural disasters, man-made and natural disasters. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. You have very specific questions, if you can be very specific with your answers.
Okay. So for the first questions, if I remember correctly, was the what other activities that we DuPont is participating for these social activities? Well, I think, well, if I start with like a Korea specific, DuPont Korea is participating habitat activities. And since we are a science company and we have plants in Ulsan, and so we are doing voluntary works to clean up the rivers and those kind of things. Well, these activities may not be highly related with educations or youth, but these activities is the one of the proof that we are working as one of the corporate living inside this society. But what I want to highlight is this kind of outside activities is matter, of course, but what we are DuPont actually doing is inside we're trying to create a atmosphere that respect the peoples and respect the diversities, respect the different genders. This kind of like inner activities are, I think, more important in these days because once you get used to those kind of situations, then you can have more, how can I say, more fluent or more brilliant works at the outside of the corporate or for the society. And challenges that we DuPont facing, actually, like I said, we are a science company, so education actually is not one of the major topics that we are dealing with. But in other way, what we are actually trying to focus on is the health and nutrition of the peoples and the safety also. We set up as these kind of things as the core values of our cooperates. So we're trying to dealing with this kind of challenges that we human beings are facing today. So we're trying to imply our solutions to challenging those problems what we are facing right now. So actually, that's the most of the challenges that we have right now.
Thank you. Give us a positive story, a positive development in your wonderful country.
There are, I think, many things. Samuel, merci pour votre question et avec votre permission, je vais répondre en anglais. Ça va, vous comprenez? Okay. I think he asked me for personal thing. I want to give you something very positive. My husband is an orphan. His father died when he was 5 years old. And what Ahmad said about the black hole is so true in Afghanistan. The most vulnerable men in Afghanistan are after 16, and they are the ones who finish high school but cannot go to the university, and there are no jobs. So the extremists come and buy them to become extremists. It's happening every day by the hundreds. And especially the orphans are vulnerable because they finish 12th grade and then they cannot go to the public university and cannot afford private university. So my husband and I have done a tiny thing and we're very happy about it. We've made 3 scholarships in a private university. By the way, private universities are very good in Afghanistan. 3 scholarships for 3 orphans. And we've got 2 of them this year. Scholarships, universities are very inexpensive in Afghanistan. For $100 a month, you can send them. And so we've got our 3 orphans and they're doing beautifully. Tiny thing. Another thing we've done for the last 14 years, this year being an exception because we couldn't find the money, we have been running adult literacy classes. I told you illiteracy is rampant, but we've made it with a twist. And that is that we've brought the husband and wife into the classroom. And you know, they go for a whole year to learn the alphabet and accounting. And every year when they graduate, it never fails. One of them comes to me and tells me, "Teacher, I didn't know I was blind until this year." And these are people from 17 years old to 85 years old. These are beautiful stories. Thank you.
Congratulations. We have only 2 more minutes. I am going to suggest that the colleagues that want to ask questions do ask to the panelists at the end because we really have to close. But I cannot close without a question, which you, Nasrine, brought it as well, which is the issue of private and public. And I'd like to ask Teopista, the majority of educational organizations in Africa are now private. Is that true? And if it is true, do you think this is correct? Shouldn't the education be more in the hands of the public, of the governments?
Well, we need to get the difference. What we do not agree with and which we need to advocate against is the privatization of education, making education a commodity, private for profit. There are private institutions that are providing education, but as long as that education is public, there's no question. The reason we are talking about public education, because it has to be inclusive. Eradication of poverty means having inclusive education so that all people, both rich and the poor, are able to live with dignity, so that we bridge the gap between those who have and those who don't have. But when we encourage private education, we are then encouraging that gap. That's why we insist that we need public education, which is provided by the state, and any private provider needs to work with the government, because the government must continue to control the provision of public education. We are against it because of those three factors. The exclusion, because it excludes, it is not inclusive to all. But above all, he also deprofessionalizes the teaching and the teachers. It is this private education which is assessing according to those standardized tests and are traumatizing the teachers. So the teachers have lost their autonomy. They also have got to teach to provide results which are based on tests. So we are talking about public education for the purpose of poverty eradication, for the purpose of inclusion, and for the purpose of harmony in the community. That's when we shall talk about global citizens who have got an organized thinking and which can never be standardized.
This was a wonderful sum up. In fact, you read it for me. Really, the questions from the public to those very generous panelists, once we've closed, because it's time to move on, it's already 12:15. I can only thank each one of the members of this table for sharing with us so important concepts, energy and enthusiasm and determination to advance on education, and each of you for participating, listening, and providing your comments. Don't go away, because more is happening today and tomorrow, and I hope to see again very soon in our next event later on. Thanks for joining us, and a big applause to all of you.